welcome everyone who has joined so far. This session with me and Tom, we will talk about stakeholder management. We will talk about champions, and we will give you tactical tips on how to maneuver the whole stakeholder people in those different deals in order for you to more or less close those deals to a higher win rate. And we will most likely try to give as much energy as possible. Tom has got some sun on him now, so he said just here before you join, I have more energy than ever. So let's get it out there. Anything to add on top of that, Tom?
No, bring it on. As you say, this is an important topic, and it has such an impact when done well on your win rates, your velocity. So we should jump in and share as much value as we can over the next hour.
Perfect. So I'll start with a statement, and you tell me if you believe in this statement. So, and before everyone, one last thing: use the chat if you want to ask any questions. Just put them in there. We'll bring them up, and and you can more steer us to what you want to talk about. But the first statement: sellers don't close deals, buyers do. What do you think when I say that, Tom? Is that do you agree? Or are you like another person that I talked to said like, no, it's sales reps closing deals? So what's your take on that?
Oh, I have some strong feelings on this that kind of bubble up as you say it. And don't get me wrong, sales, salespeople, we have a role to play. Of course we do. But I think we over-index, we put too much importance on the closing part, when the reality is that, we probably have quite a small role to play in any B2B purchasing decision. I'm sure, people on this webinar will have seen the research from Gartner. It shows kind of where prospects spend their time. Only 17% of their time is actually engaging with potential suppliers. And by the way, that's normally kind of 2 or 3 suppliers. So you divide that 17% by 3, you end up with prospects only really spending 5 or 6% of their time with a salesperson. So the remaining, 95% is spent researching, engaging, with the broader buying group internally. And as salespeople, I think we need to understand that.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to facilitate that buying process and make it easy to do business with our company, even when we're not in the room. And I have to say, I have an issue with the word closing. I have had for a little while. Those who know me will know that I don't like this word. In fact, I'd like to completely ban the word closing. The whole ABC, always be closing thing should be actually ABD, I think, always be discovering, because that's really what we need to be doing. We need to be discovering. We need to be helping prospects kind of navigate the complexities of buying. And I think if we do that, the customer will complete their buying journey. They'll complete their buying process. So really, with our support being enabling that. So we are buyer enablers. We're not sellers trying to close a deal. So yeah, I could get on my soapbox for longer about it, but I'll stop.
Cool. Then I'll put you in contact with the person I talked to. I'll share the screen a little bit and let me see here. I hope everyone sees it. So this was, last time we talked about sales methodologies, and this is even more important, as you can see here. Like lack of sales methodology was one of the biggest challenges when we asked, one of the 6 biggest challenges when we asked sales leaders out there, but actually stakeholders and the complicated process connected to them was even more important than the challenge. And looking at these numbers now, Tom, we can see here that, and I think you were a part of actually bringing this report to life, that if you're running enterprise or medium-sized deals, actually involving the right amount of stakeholders is actually helping you to increase win rate with something around 10-ish to 20% to up to 40, 50. And not only that, we also can see that the average close rate goes down with about 20 to 30%. And why do you think, do you believe in these numbers, or is this more like, some data that is out there, but that isn't true? What's your feeling about these numbers?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely believe in these numbers. Of course, they've been produced by Pavilion. I'm the founder of the UK chapter of Pavilion, but also with Ebster, and it's based on a huge amount of data points across the Ebster, customer base and the various reps that are doing stuff within their tools. So for me, these numbers are irrefutable. And the question might be, well, why is this the case nowadays? Why are we seeing sales cycles lengthen? Why are we seeing more stakeholders involved? I saw something, I think, by Jason Lemkin talking about sales cycles actually being 58% of people are now saying they're significantly longer than they were 2 years ago. So yeah, there's clearly something happening here.
So what do you think the case, like if we would ask like 3 or 4 years ago, the feeling wasn't the same that stakeholders will pop up as the maybe one of the most biggest challenges. Why do you think that has changed now, and why is it even more important now coming up on these being the topics on sales leaders' minds?
Yeah, well, listen, I'm not going to give a huge lesson on kind of macroeconomic environment and economics, but I think it's important to have a bit of context and to understand these numbers and why they might be trending in this direction. So, the post-COVID funding environment, and high interest rates has basically meant that capital is just not as cheap as it was. And so funding has dropped significantly. You've seen the amount of capital going into startups massively decrease, and into all businesses, in fact. And so less capital often leads to more focus on looking after that capital, what we call capital efficiency. So companies are looking to reduce costs, they're consolidating their tech stacks, they're being definitely more considered about what they're buying and where they're buying it from. And so this scrutiny on spend and maybe nervousness about making the right purchase decision is going to equal generally more stakeholders involved. In particular, I think finance or CFOs and procurement teams that really want to scrutinize these deals to make sure that the business case stacks up. And I think at times like this, no one wants to get fired for making the wrong decision. So when that happens, people generally bring more people into the buying group. They generally want more stakeholders to sign off. And those buying committees, therefore, have increased in size. And some of you, older ones on the call might remember saying, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. And I think
nowadays you do, though.
Yeah.
Now you need to buy something else.
You're a dinosaur if you're buying IBM nowadays. But I think it's important just to remember that this risk mitigation, especially if you're a startup, selling into companies, you need to really mitigate risk, and you need to make sure that you've got a tangible business case that you can stand behind with your product or service. And I think those sales reps maybe who found it easier to sell maybe 3-4 years ago in 2020 and 2021 are having to change the way they sell now. They're having to put new steps in their process. They're having to think really more carefully about creating that business case with their champion. And I think, this macroeconomic environment has definitely led to some of these things we're seeing in the data.
Yeah. And maybe the first tip today, and you can give yours. I was just in a call the other week, actually, with one of our customers or prospects that wanted to become a customer. And I was called in, just as you said, the CFO was invited, and the rep thought like, oh, I need some help. I've not talked to so many CFOs. And of course, the CFO came in and said, hey, we're this amount of users. It should be cheaper, yada, yada. I come here to make sure that we don't go over our budget. And I just had nothing to fight with, because I came in maybe a little bit too late. And I got out of that call, and actually I just moved us from negotiation stage to kind of discovery or solution again to the rep. And they were like, but you didn't help at all. I was like, yeah, but we should bring this up front earlier. Like, we need to have, you mentioned business case, we need to have that earlier. So my tip then would be like, if you already know that those stakeholders will pop up, and you should know that, why not bring them up earlier and actually lead the way and say, hey, you need to be here due to X, Y, Z, or else we'll just talk bad things in the end here because we don't have the business case. So I had no ROI to present, and that was really challenging to get past. And actually, the deal is yet not closed. So yeah. And any tips you have there on like, okay, what should you do to make sure that they are involved?
I feel deeply uncomfortable going into a negotiation or any ending part of a sales process without a business case to stand behind. But I think what you said there is really true, that the key here is discovery. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more as we go through this webinar. But if you're not front loading your sales process with really good discovery to find out what those pain points are, the impact of those pain points, the value you can create for that customer, and not just the champion that you might be speaking to, but how is that value interpreted across the buying group, across different stakeholders, and how can you articulate that in terms that make sense to them? So for me, it's about really good discovery, of course, at the start of the sales process, but you should never really end your discovery. You carry it on. You're constantly finding new ways to present data back to them that shows that very clear business case as to why they should make a move.
Yeah, I agree. So we've said now stakeholders, I think at least 20, 40 times. So sharing screen here again. So stakeholders, when we talk about stakeholders, what do we actually mean? I just put down a couple here as bullets. Would you say that I missed anything that you want to talk more about? A very quick question there.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that you've missed anyone. I'd say that sometimes stakeholders can fulfill multiple of these roles.
Yeah.
But I think you've captured most of them. So a framework that I typically use is the Miller-Hyman model, which basically breaks down stakeholders into 4 types. You've got a champion, you've got an economic buyer, you've got a technical buyer, and you've got a user buyer. Now, you might have multiple of those in technical and user buyers. Generally, you only have one economic buyer, and generally, you only have one champion. I think you've covered all of those bases in here.
Perfect. Can the champion be the economic buyer?
Well, of course they can, but I think the common mistake that salespeople make is thinking that their champion is the economic buyer when typically they're not. Yeah. So, in my view.
And anyone here in the chat, if you would choose, Tom, if you would choose, let's say 3 that you always need to make sure that you have identified, that you have a relationship to, that you have been talking to or have planned to talk to, who would they be?
Well, that for me is an easy choice. And we've talked about, I've mentioned the champion a few times already. For me, really hard to win a deal without one. You need someone inside that buying organization who can advocate for you, who can navigate the internal buying process, that 95% of the time when you're not there. You need someone that's going to help build the business case with you, ensure that business case speaks to the needs of different stakeholders. So for me, the champion is really key. That champion could also be the initiator, the person that kind of initiates that kind of outreach, whether that be a form or whatever it might be, but they're absolutely key. The second one for me is the DM, the decision maker. The clue is in the name. They're going to make the decision. And if you want them to pick you as a supplier, you need to understand what is important to them in a vendor. So what is their criteria for making a decision? What is driving the need for them specifically? What concerns might they have that need to be addressed? What would success look like for them in terms of finding a vendor and solving this problem? And then most importantly, what does the business case need to look like for them to get it signed off? So decision maker, absolutely key. And then my third and final one, it's called the financial buyer here. I call it the economic buyer. Sometimes also the DM, but not always. But if they're going to be signing off on the deal, we need to understand that process, but also the budget that's assigned to the project or purchase. Like I want to understand in detail how that check is going to get signed, how that order form is going to get signed, that contract's going to get signed. What are the steps that we're going to have to go through with legal and anyone else?
Got it. And you could only choose 3, but I added the 4th on mine. So you see here the gatekeeper, because I don't know how many times I've been stalled by gatekeepers. One for us could be the CRM administrator, configurator. You go in, everyone wants to buy, everyone is ready. They're even ready to sign the deal. And then someone who is often a lone wolf somewhere in the organization says like, yeah, but I don't have time to implement this. Like, yeah, can't be done this year. I was like, but come on, it's just like 40 hours of your time, maybe, or 10 or whatever. And no, I will not. And then because that lone wolf is often so important for that CRM to work, they don't dare to push over that one. So I would keep an extra eye on that gatekeepers and really identify who can. They will not win the deal for you, but they will stop the deal.
Yeah, I call them the technical buyers. They have a veto. They can't say yes, but they can say no.
Yeah, cool. So let's get really tactical. If you are a manager out there listening in, I'll remove the screen share for a second. If you're a manager out there listening, what would you say that they should make sure to do in order to enable their reps when it comes to stakeholders? And before you go, on this one, I just wanted to share my thought on it. Sorry for taking the question from you. So
Okay.
one thing that we have been doing a lot is like, okay, first of all, like you need to identify the stakeholders, and then you need to have a way to work with them. So I wanted to just quickly share here, like we have built this framework for you to use out there. We will share it with you. Mr. Frederick here in the behind me will just pop it in the chat so you can just access these documents. But it is about like understanding who are you talking to, who are the stakeholders, your personas, but also say like, okay, what goals do they have? What are their pain points and how can you address them? Also then analyze the 10 best like won deals, like who did you talk to? How did you talk to those persons? And then it goes on. And then you need to create a process. But one thing that I think is really important, of course, is also like training, yada, yada. And there is communication. Yeah, know their pains and the answers to them. How do you talk to that specific stakeholder? I just mentioned the gatekeeper here being the technical buyer, the Salesforce admin, and we have that person up for review always. And how should we engage that person? So that person almost like says, like, we need to put this in now, and not says something opposite. What would be your best tactical tips on top of like a framework?
Yeah, well, firstly, I love that. I love that you've got that form and that framework laid out. And to your point around understanding their pains and answers for them, I'd also add to that understanding their drivers too, because different stakeholders will have different drivers, different things that they're thinking about that's important to them. You know, procurement, for example, a great example of someone that gets more involved now, certainly at bigger deals, but asking someone in procurement or purchasing, what is important to them? Like, is it the best possible cost? Is it the best return on investment? Is it the best service? You know, the number of reps that don't ask those basic questions about drivers, I think it always staggers me. And I think we should be always seeking to find drivers. But to your question in particular, which I will answer. So in my view, I think, you know, stakeholder mapping and engagement just needs to be a formal part of the sales process and a consistent part of conversations that managers are having with their reps. It should be discussed in pipeline reviews. It should be discussed in forecasting meetings. And there needs to be a common vernacular or vocabulary that is used across the sales org. And it might be that you're using the Miller-Hyman buyer persona names. It might be the ones that you've shared today. But whatever it is, you need to embed that into your sales org is the first thing. And then the second thing is like teach your reps or help them to understand why engaging stakeholders is important. Share the data on win rates. You know, when you engage certain stakeholders, you know, explore in your win-loss reviews, assuming you're doing your win-loss reviews, explore how when you engage certain stakeholders, you improved your chance of winning or you decrease your sales cycle. Highlight great examples of stakeholder engagement across the team and just celebrate it when it's done well. So that's the first thing I would say, is it kind of really build it into the culture of your org. And then to your point earlier about coaching and role plays, I think this is key. I think practice. You know, if you think about it, you know, understanding the buying process and stakeholders really just comes down to asking really good questions. Now we can be lazy about how we ask these questions. You know, for example, I don't think it's good enough just to ask, you know, what is your decision-making process? Or are you the decision maker on this? Because what do you think a prospect is going to say when you're speaking to them and you say, are you the decision maker on this? What do you think, Samir? What will they say?
I think I can count on my hands how often that has happened. No, but depends a little bit on how much relationship you have built before asking that questions. If you ask it too early, they will kind of like, yeah, but I'm in control, especially if they have kind of a title being a VP or something, they will say yes. But I think if you have started to build that relationship and maybe you can get out a no, but most likely not, I would say.
Yeah, generally people don't want to show that they don't have authority or decision-making right. So they will say, yes, I'm the decision maker.
Yeah.
So my view is you need to ask a different set of questions that probe around that buying process and the stakeholders. And I think we need to put time aside to do proper discovery around the buying process like we would do around pains and impact. So I'll give you some questions that I like to ask that, you know, I taught on my course, and maybe we can share some of these in the chat as well. So when you've bought a solution like this in the past, what was the typical process that you followed? You know, it's a curious, non-threatening question. It's an open question. It's not asking about the process you're going to follow now with me. It's about reflecting on the past.
Yeah.
And you can also ask, you know, what criteria did you use to make a decision? So this is a great set of open questions that can help you to explore who might be involved, what steps did they take, and it's non-threatening. Another one, you know, who else would this project be important to?
Yeah.
Again, it's an open question. You're going to tease out things like user buyers and technical buyers, you know, to really understand who else it could be impacting or important to. Another one I really like, which I don't think people ask enough, and they ask it in a slightly different way, actually. They might say something like, will your manager be involved? Which is a closed question and easy for them to say no. Assume they're going to be involved and ask an open question. Say, how would your manager usually get involved in a process like this? So you're assuming they will get involved. And then you can kind of almost take a slightly different angle and say, who would typically be the most senior person to get involved in a process like this? So here you might be teasing out that economic buyer or decision maker, rather than is your boss is the final sign-off, which is, again, another closed question. And then another one, just quickly, is who else will want to ensure this project is successful? Or you could say, who will this project impact?
Yeah.
And you're going to tease out user buyers and technical buyers and other people. But really, I'm trying to build a rich picture of the various stakeholders with these questions. And you might have to answer, you know, or ask these in slightly different ways at different times to really draw out the reality of the buying situation in that company.
I love it. Tactical tips. So summary, let's see if I can get all of them, but at least how is the process done before? Who are you going to pitch internally? What more was it? And then the third one, or you had 6 maybe, but one was at least like the process itself, how it been implementing, or
I am putting them in the chat as
put them in the chat.
So everyone has them there.
We will also make a short snippet from this recording to make sure they get out there, so that people can help. And while you're putting them in chat, I'll just share here again, like because I think this information is quite important. So let's see here where I have the slide of that. So when we talk to reps out there and we're asking how many stakeholders are involved in the deal, the average that will come out, and they will say like will land on about 3.1. So reps then, and that is many people asked, would come down at 3.1. But looking at deal rooms and looking at that data that deal room has revealed actually tells something different. So that tells that 7.4 is the actual number. So 7.4 individuals, unique individuals, are in the deal room in those deals that are getting done. And I think based on what you just said, you need to ask those questions, or else you will actually be just talking to too few people, most likely, and that will bring down the win rate. So and when I ask that question internally, like how many have you been talking to, do you have these, and they come down to short, I think like the attitude to stakeholders and then maybe the incompetence from each rep is kind of their own, like their own biggest challenge. So I think these questions that you just mentioned is something that we need to, as you say, train the reps to ask in different ways to make sure that we identify up to maybe 7, 8 to get that win rate on the levels we want to. So I actually totally agree there. I'll remove the sharing again. Tom, we'll talk about champions. We have mentioned also a business case. Maybe we'll talk about that. And we have those different stakeholders, but I think the champion came up as the number one. Someone also mentioned it in the chat. And often we say that if you don't have a champion, you don't have a deal. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think champions are just critical to winning deals. You know, as I said earlier, you're only in the room 5% of the time. You need your champion to be in there advocating for you when you're not there, but you also need to help them, or you need them to help you, should I say, navigate their internal buying process. So, you know, things like sharing names of other stakeholders, sharing data points for your business case, scheduling meetings with user buyers or technical buyers. But my view is they're only a champion if they meet 2 critical criteria. And I'm open to be challenged on this, but this is my personal viewpoint. So my view is that they're only really a champion if, firstly, they have, in verbally or in writing, confirm that they are advocating for you and your solution. So like they need to be championing you, not just championing solving the problem in the business, but championing your solution. And the second thing is they need to be able to steal or influence budget or have a budget that they basically control. And then I suppose you could add a third one, which is kind of linked to that, which is they need to be able to drive the right decisions and actions within the internal organization to get that deal over the line. So, but I think the big one for me is they need to have told me that they're advocating for me and my solution.
How do you ask that question?
Well, I think for me there's a timing to this as well, but I also think you can use something called the rule of reciprocity. So I don't know if anyone knows about this, but the rule effectively states that we as humans we're all bound, maybe even driven to repay debts, and it works because as humans we kind of don't like owing anyone anything. So if we give someone something, they actually kind of feel obliged to give something in return. So when a prospect asks you for something or you offer something, there's this fleeting moment when they'll actually feel obliged to give you something back. So the sooner we ask for something in return, the easier it is for us to get it, largely because that feeling of being in debt is still fresh in their mind. So I think you can use this rule of reciprocity to ask for a champion. But I think you've got to time it right. The challenge is often like, how and when do you ask them to be your champion? Like, do you just say, will you be my champion on this deal on a cold call? Probably not going to work. The trick is getting that timing right. And it's often best a little bit later in the sales process, of course, but also when they've just asked you for something. So for example, if a champion says to me, can you put together, an ROI analysis or get a discount for them?
Yeah.
They've just asked for something. And I think a champion is a completely viable thing to ask for in return, as long as you've built the relationship and trust, of course. So let me play that out, how it might sound. So let's say they've just asked you for a better price that they can take to the economic buyer. They're trying to negotiate it. And we might say something like, look, I'm going to have to go and fight for you internally on this, as we don't normally give away discounts. Can I ask you, if I'm going to fight for you internally and get you that discount, will you be fighting for me internally on your side too? It's a good way of just checking, are they fighting for you or are they just trying to get a good price? And then maybe give you another example. Let's say they ask you to produce, a business case or ROI analysis for them. They say, hey, Tom, can you put together an ROI analysis? Because I need to present this to my CEO. And you could say, sure, no problem. That's going to take me a bit of time to pull it together. If the numbers come back the way I think they're going to come back, can I ask you, when you present this to your CEO, are you going to be presenting us as the solution you're advocating for? So again, you're just using that rule of reciprocity to check in and see whether they are a real champion. And if they say they're not advocating for you, I mean, that's fine. It's kind of good to know where you stand, and you can then explore why and who they are advocating for potentially. Yeah. So I think using that rule of reciprocity can be a really good way of doing it.
Yeah, I love it. Again, three very tactical things. And I actually had the question here popping up, like, how do you really know if they are a champion? Because I don't know how many times I come into and talk to sales, and I talk about, I saw this deal, like we have that in the pipe. And the first answer is like, yeah, we have. And you know what? Tom, we talked to Tom. He's a fantastic champion. He will do X, Y, Z for us. He will walk the whole world around for us. And I'm like, everyone tells the same story. It's always champions everywhere. So I have a couple of questions that I also tend to ask, but how do you, now you mentioned a couple, how do you know, or actually let me put it like this, I will answer my own question, because sometimes those champions tend to be people who are just vetting, they're the initiators, so they look at X, Y, Z competitors. And one thing that I always do is like, okay, you're saying that you will pitch us, which they will say that, maybe everyone. And then I will ask, can you please just describe why you would like to choose us in front of the others? And I think that helps a lot, because you can kind of notice if they kind of care about the value points that you have been putting forward. You can kind of hear if they're more eager to pitch your solution, and if they get excited about the different things that you've been talking about, or if they just like, okay, but I don't feel comfortable about it, or they just say something that is very general and they haven't really listened out. What would you say? Do you have any other like ways of really putting them on the spot, which sometimes can be hard?
Yeah, I think that you said a really important point there, Samir, which is like, how can we almost test and evaluate their ability to pitch us internally? Because ultimately, that's what a champion is doing for you. Of course, you want to be in the room wherever you can. And if there's a meeting happening, with a decision maker or an economic buyer, I'm always going to try and be in that meeting because I feel like I'm going to be best placed to ultimately pitch the solution and the value prop in the best way. But also hearing those objections that might come up live is really, really valuable. So
Exactly.
my first pointer is try and be in the room where you can. Try and improve your 5% and take it up to 10% or 15% wherever you can. Of course, it's not always possible. Like, I get it. Like, there's always going to be conversations that you're not invited into. So my real advice here is that you need to build a good enough relationship with that champion where they see you as a business partner that's helping them achieve whatever they need to achieve. And by the way, they're all humans. They want recognition, they want promotion, they want pay rise. Like, it's going to be one of these things that's driving them.
Yeah.
How can you align with those drivers? How can you really show them that you care about giving them, whatever they're looking for? And then how can you work with them to really create a compelling business case? Because that's what really matters nowadays. You need a business case to stand by. And I think if you can really work with them to understand their drivers, but not just their drivers, the drivers of the other stakeholders in the buying chain, because they're all going to be different. I think we as salespeople can often think, oh, well, my champion cares about this thing, so therefore, surely everyone else cares about that thing. Well, no. Your economic buyer might care about something else. You might have technical or user buyers that care about something. You're going to definitely have user buyers that are fearful of change. And so you need to deal with that as a driver. But I think if you can work with your champion to create a business case that speaks to the needs of the different stakeholders, that is the best way to enable them to ultimately sell it internally for you.
I agree fully. And we've mentioned business case, so maybe next webinar will be about just business cases, but I'll do a quick one here. So actually inside of GetAccept, Tom, and you're also a user of GetAccept, maybe you can tell a story later, but one thing is the business case. So we've mentioned it 10,000 times now. It feels like you build a business case, you build it with the champion, you enable them to pitch you internally through the business case. And maybe the business case is kind of the core in how to move forward. And as you can see here in GetAccept, what we've built is more or less like, as we've talked about in different webinars, like you have this room, everything goes into the room, you can identify persons, etc. I'll ask you soon, Tom, to click a link that I sent to you. But on top of that, what we also have built there is like, okay, but we know that we need to build a business case, and those business cases can have templates. And as you can see here for us, we're working towards the media, we're working towards hospitality, professional service, etc. And we have the SaaS and tech, which is our biggest one. And of course, here you can see like what's in this business case and how can that support. So I'll choose this one to publish that to the room. And then you can see here how we can kind of guide, like you need to have a compelling title. And you can build that. We have built on our like business case template on top of how MedPick tells that you should build them. I'll just quickly scroll over here to like kind of built one. And this is how you then can build it out. You will show it to, of course, and build it with the stakeholder or with the champion. But you can then also like, of course, what I like a lot is to, as you are progressing and the next step is then pitching them, I always ask them like, okay, how would you present this to the next person? And I listen in. And if I just feel about this didn't go really well, I kind of, okay, let's spend a little bit more time on these things. Why couldn't we get to that part? Or why couldn't you mention these things? Or how do you think about these different scenarios here? Like, yeah, I wouldn't pitch the best case scenario because that would never happen. Okay, but then we shouldn't have that best case scenario, right? But then also what can happen is like, of course, in here, they will then comment and say, hey, in this case, Frederick, I know is the CFO. You see, Frederick is the CEO or CFO. So I want him to be the one that I'm popping in here. And then I can, look at the ROI here wherever, and send it. So now Frederick, as that person then enters that room, they will get guided to this specific position so that they can see it. If you, Tom, I sent you a room, and I know you had a story about engaging the right stakeholders. So if you click that link, and then you can maybe tell about that. But what we also can do here is like identify who has been visiting the room and when. So Frederick, in this case, the CFO, 14 days since he was in here last time, he spent 1 minute and 24 minutes, but he didn't read the business case at all. And now you can see here, Tom is in the room. Actually, you can see it. He's active now. And if he clicks the business case page there to the left, we can also kind of live see where he's spending his time, which means that, of course, we can then understand where do they spend time, what do they think is interesting. You had a story about how you were using it just another day. That could you just share that with us?
Yeah, of course. So those of you that don't know what Scalewise does, we provide kind of go-to-market leaders to our clients, either interim, fractional, or full-time. And we were working with a CEO quite recently who was looking for us to find them a VP of marketing. And they kind of weren't sure whether to go down the fractional route or whether they should go full-time. So I kind of uploaded information about both of those options into the GetAccept deal room and invited the CEO in. And I suppose I wasn't too sure at this stage which way he was going to go. I kind of felt he was on the fence. And we thought, actually at the time, I thought that this was purely going to be a decision made by the CEO as well. I hadn't done my usual deep dive on the who might be the different stakeholders. Bad me. But then until what ended up happening is the CEO started inviting in other people. So he invited in the chairman of the company. There was an investor that was invited in, and then an advisor on the marketing side had all been added into the deal room. And I could see, obviously, in the analytics, like you just showed, Samir, that we had these people. And what was super interesting was the chairman was actually spending a lot of time looking at the information about having a fractional VP marketing.
Yeah.
The investor kind of skimmed over that completely, but was really diving into the full-time information around our process and how we do that. And then both the CEO and the advisor kind of looked at both. And so it was clear to me when I looked at the engagement analytics that we had differing views across this kind of buying committee, as it were. And what this did is it just created a really valuable conversation. The next time I spoke to the CEO.
How did you use that? How did you get to the next step?
Well, how did I get to? Well, I chatted with the CEO in the deal room, and I said, "Hey, look, it would be great. I can see that you've looked at both options. I can also see that the investor and the chairman have looked at different things. Can we? I think it would be good for us to have an alignment call between all of us where we can get on the same page and we can really prioritize what was needed." So what ended up happening? It was the investor that was really driving the process here, and ultimately we all managed to land on it. Okay, it was going to be a full-time employee, not a fractional, and then we got that. We made that progress a lot quicker than I think if I hadn't had that visibility of what was going on in the deal room.
Yeah, no, but it's a good way. But as you also said, like you talked about that discovery, like understanding how can we actually help, and of course, knowing more, you can also steer the direction. Okay, but I see that maybe there are some challenges for some reason. Maybe you don't talk on that on their end. I don't know why, but I know that you need to put someone in place before end of summer or whatever, before summer. So how can we get that in the quicker way? So I think it was a really good story there that you shared. So I think we're coming to our end. We will send the recording to everyone that has joined. We will most likely pop out some parts of it on LinkedIn. I think there was tons of tactical things. So thank you, Tom, for sharing those questions and those tactical parts that you can more or less start doing tomorrow if you want, being a sales rep, or that you can start implementing as a manager running your sales organizations. On top of that, what more to tell? Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, we have a next webinar next week. It will be around connecting everything to your CRM, because, for example, one cool thing is when stakeholders pop into a room that you don't know about, we can actually populate those into the CRM and check off boxes that, okay, I have identified 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and the fifth person. We also wanted to Let's see here. There was some questions or no? Higher up. Let's see here.
Yeah, we have one here from James Hewitt.
Yeah, James, yes. Yeah, keen to hear, Tom, on some effective ways to open a dialogue with a new relevant stakeholder. How to do this gracefully without stepping on toes? And should we go after meeting or quick dialogue?
Or phone or LinkedIn. So yeah, I think it's a really good question, James. And I suppose it depends how that stakeholder has been introduced to you. I think if they've been introduced by a champion, I think what's really important is that you share what you know about that company and the discovery that you've done so far. You share what you deem to be important based on what the champion's told you. But I think it's incumbent on us as salespeople to do the same level of discovery with that new stakeholder that we would have maybe done with the champion, because we want to hear their perspectives, we want to hear their drivers, their objections and motivations. So that's better, definitely not done on LinkedIn. I think whether it's a phone call or an in-person meeting, you need to decide that based on your average order value and whether it makes sense to be meeting every stakeholder in person. But I would say that, without stepping on toes, to your point, is make sure that people understand why you're meeting with stakeholders. Make sure that your champion knows that this is about making their lives easier, that you're doing some heavy lifting for them. So I think there's ways that you can position engaging with other stakeholders so your champion actually wants to introduce you to them versus feeling like, okay, you're getting in the way or stepping on their toes.
Yeah, and I don't know how many, this will be my more a little bit crazy tip, but I don't know how many times I've asked our reps or people doing sales that, hey, maybe you also need to go around someone. And I know that's not a good tip in one way, but what I like now is often that when you share a room, you don't need to go around anyone. Like, you didn't go and talk to the chairman by the side or in a hidden meeting or something. That chairman actually popped into the room and suddenly you have a reason to speak to that person, right? And that just helps so much. So we have actually seen now that, okay, if we have the room, if we get in all those persons by sharing the right content for those persons, the Salesforce kind of instructions on how to install is shared to the Salesforce admin. And suddenly I can, you're in there. I can easily start chatting. Doesn't feel that tough to just get into those discussions. And that just helps a lot. So you don't need to bypass, but sometimes actually need to bypass. And even if it's hard, sometimes that needs to happen. I've seen it work. But of course, you can't step on toes and lose the deal. Cool. I think that was it for today. So again, then everyone who wants to understand how to connect your deal rooms to your CRM to create efficiency, but also to fuel your CRM with the right information from stakeholders, but also make it more engaging for your reps to actually use your CRM, not being the boring thing. You should tune in next week on the 28th. We'll send some invites for that. And also on top of that, I wanted to just share, if you're interested in using a digital sales room, if you want to, explore that a little bit. Right now, we have that discount on 25% if you want to start using it. So go grab it. And we will also then onboard you free of charge, help you with all the content, how to work with stakeholders. We'll talk about these stakeholders frameworks, and we'll implement things in your digital sales room solution to get that working. And that was it. Tom, thank you so much for joining in and for being so smart. And look at that, amazing. And for sharing that knowledge and very tactical hands-on things. Anyone who has any feedback, feel free to share it with us. And that's it. We have our 45 minutes done.
Amazing. Really enjoyed it. Thanks everyone in the chat for your questions and your engagement. Really amazing. Thanks, Samir, for having me. It was great fun.
Amazing. Take care, Tom. Bye-bye.
Speak to you soon.